Previously on CSIS 2470.
Normally when I make a function, I have to type the keyword function, but these don't have that. And normally when you make a variable, you have to say let or const or var or something, but we're not doing that. That's because we're inside of a class and we're basically taking the square peg of a variable and we're sticking it in the round hole of a property, right? And so we're adapting the use of variables to become what we call properties in classes. And the same things with the function. We're adapting what we call functions to be methods inside of a class. And so we just have a little bit different syntax, that's all. Okay, next up, let's go ahead and get rid of bingo for now. We're just going to stick with one dog, just Pluto. And I'm going to show you a few things here. You know, eventually, someday, Pluto's going to turn 5 or whatever age he is now. We don't know how old he is actually. And so I can say Pluto.age is equal to 5. And now when line 23 runs, it'll say that Pluto is 5. When I get Pluto.age, we refresh, and now he's 5. Okay, so we've directly accessed this variable like we did earlier when we manually created the name and everything. I can do that. I can change his name. Pluto.name is Bingo now, or whatever, right? I've changed Pluto's name. And if I wanted to see the name now, I print it out and it says Bingo, right? Okay, well, we do want the user to be able to change things, but we want to have some control over that a little bit, right? So let's get rid of the name change there. Like, for example, what if they put for age Beavis or heavy, or maybe that wouldn't work, but old would work. Maybe they put old for the age. Well, that's not right. Now I've let them say old and captured a non-number. So that's not good. So we need to fix that problem, okay? Well, the problem is that right now, these variables are what we call public. They are publicly available, right? Meaning, all that means is that you can access them in your code outside of the actual class, right? Notice this code on line 19 and below is not inside of this class, yet I'm still able to get to the age variable. We want to make it private and then have a function that can access it and change it for us. We call that a setter, okay? So let's look at how that would look. In most programming languages, you would just put the private keyword here and be done. But no, JavaScript has to be different, right? So what we do here is you put an octothorpe in front of it, which is really weird. And then you have to put the same thing down here. And now these are now private. And now line 21, even if it was a valid number, will not work. Now when we refresh, you'll notice it appears like it worked, but it's not quite what you think, okay? So first of all, notice the 4 here, and I put a 4 there, and if I change that to a 5, I will get a 5 here, okay? The reason that's happening is because we're not quite done with this privacy stuff here just yet. But before we get to that, notice when I try to do Pluto.name, I'm getting this undefined right here, okay? The reason that is because Pluto name, or just name, is private. And I'm trying to print a private variable and I don't have permission to access it anymore. So the question becomes, well, how did I do it on line 23? Well, technically I didn't. What happened on line 3 is, or on line 23 I should say, started on line 21. When I created line 21, what I essentially did, for the want of a better way to describe it, was added a new variable called age that's public, right? And then, I'm going to delete that so I don't forget about it. Then down here, when I'm printing it out, I'm printing that new one. I'm not actually accessing this one right here, right? If I were to comment this out, now when I try to access that, it's going to try to go for the private one, and then I'll get an undefined there as well. Refresh, and it's undefined. Even though we did define it, it's 4, but we don't have the ability to access it now because we've made it private, okay? Well, this line 21 thing, we don't want them to be able to create their own variables either, so we got to fix that. That's where the setter comes in, okay? Now, if you're familiar with other object-oriented languages, these setters are a little weird. They're a little different from what you might be used to, okay? You actually use the keyword set. It's just a function, but we say set, and then whatever the name of the variable is, and then put function parentheses around it, and then you put the code in there. So we're going to say this dot age is equal to whatever variable gets passed in there. We could pass an A there, we could pass an age there, whatever. We'll just go with A. So we'll say this dot age And we need to make sure we put that octothorpe in there. So what line 14 is doing is making a function that can take in a parameter, and the parameter value that'll go here will get assigned to this. And this function is public. Okay. Now this doesn't solve our problem where they could still put in a word or whatever. We'll take care of that in a minute. But let's look at what happens now. Right here, you would think that I would want to do this. That seems like what you would want to do, right? And if you've looked at other programming languages that are object-oriented, that's exactly what you would do. But not JavaScript. No. You actually remain this way. When you do this, though, it knows now, because set age exists, it will run this function right here. And this 5 will be the parameter that goes to that A, and it will assign it to this .age, the private version of it. So if we refresh this now, we get undefined again. Now, why is that? It seems weird, right? Well, let's look at it for a minute. This actually did work. It does work. It did set age to 5. But when I tried to print it out, it says undefined. The second undefined was this name business here, right? The first undefined says Pluto.age. That's because I'm not allowed to access that, because that's not a thing anymore, right? What there really is that. That's a thing, but I can't even access that, because if I refresh that, I get an uncaught syntax error, because it's a private field and you're not allowed to access private variables. And so if I want to see the age, I have to use a getter. And it's the same kind of idea here, where we say get age. We don't need a parameter this time. And I'm just going to return this dot age. And so it will return whatever that value is. And again, in other programming languages, you would do that. You would call it like a function, but not JavaScript. You do it like that. Say Pluto.age, right? And it knows to get, because of that keyword there. And now when I refresh, we get 5. So seeing the fact that we got a 5 there proves that this did work, right? We put a 5 here, and it called the set function, the setter, and it handed that 5 right there from line 24 to this A on line 14. And then it says, okay, set the main variable age to that A right there. And then if we want to print it, I say Pluto.age, and that knows to get the getter. And this is all, somewhat kind of magic when you use that octothorpe to make things private, and then you create the setter and getter. It works that way. It kind of works automatically, right? And in fact, if I were to try to put a parenthesis there for age, you see we get an error, right? That it's not a function, which is just bizarre, even though it kind of is. I mean, it looks like a function to me, okay? All right, now remember though, the point was I can still, if I wanted to put old here, I'm going to get rid of these two guys so that we can just focus on the age here. It still lets me put old. Well, we don't want that. That's no good. So we need to make sure that the data put in is valid, right? Now, I'm not going to go into any extensive error checking, but just a simple basic idea is this. There's a function called number or it's a class called number in JavaScript, right? And so what it does, it takes in a parameter and converts it into a number. So you could take the string 123 and it would convert it into the number 123, right? So if I take number, we're going to do an if statement, number A, which is the thing that the user passed in, or that we're passing in on line 28, if it triple equals A, meaning they have the same data type, and obviously they're the same value, but that they also have the same data type. Well, this converts whatever A is into an actual number. And this is before it was converted. And so if after this was converted to a number, it matches this in data type, meaning they're both numbers, then it's a valid number. So if that's the case, then we do this. Else, we can say console.error, that is not a number, or it's not valid, or whatever you want the error message to be. For now, this is simple enough. So what's going to happen here is old is going to get passed in to here. We're going to take old and convert it to a number. Well, you can't do that, obviously, right? So it's still going to be a string or something. And then we're going to be looking at this, whatever the number old turns into, whatever that looks like as a number, it certainly will not match in data type this, because this is a string, okay? So because there's no match, the else will run. So if we refresh it, we should get a console error. That's not a number. And if you expand it, it shows you a little bit more detail. Notice here, though, that we still get a 4. What's the 4? it's Pluto.age. Well, what's age? Well, it's 4, because we couldn't change it on line 28. Wouldn't let us, right? But if I put a valid number there, an actual number, we'll do 5, for example, refresh, and now we get 5, and everything's working just fine. And so what we've done is a little bit of very rudimentary error trapping here. You'd obviously want to get a little bit more involved, use some try-catch statements and everything you would need to do to make sure maybe you have ranges, like your dog is not allowed to be older than a certain age. You don't want to have negative numbers in there. There's a whole bunch of things you would want to do. That's beyond the purpose of today's focus here. I'm just showing you that in order to properly take in the user input or the code inputting it like we are on line 28, you must have a setter that can do the error trapping and make sure that the data is valid. All right, so now when you're looking at this, remember, dogs have lots of properties. They have age, name, color, breed, and 1,000 other things that you may or may not want to track. Height, dietary requirements, weight, all kinds of stuff. Every one of those would need to be in the constructor and here, which is in the constructor, and they all need a setter and a getter. Every one of them. And they all need to be private, so you need the octothorpe. And so you need everything to be this structure, right? There's a set age, get age. Then there's going to be a set color, get color. Set name, get name. Set breed, get the breed. If I had weight in there, set weight, get weight. So you could quickly see how this can get pretty humongous. Lots and lots of components to it. But when all is said and done, put this in a completely separate file, right? And then you just got one line of code right there to create your dog. Of course, you'd have to pass in any other parameters that you decide to add. So if you decided to track the weight, you'd have to pass that in and so forth. Okay. So that's the basic idea of an object. We're going to look at a couple more things, obviously. And then the following lecture after this one, we will cover some important topics and sort of theoretical things about object-oriented programming. We'll briefly touch on the pillars. Acronym for that is PIE, P-I-E, polymorphism, inheritance, and encapsulation. We'll talk about those briefly in the next video, or not the next video, but the next lecture, okay? But for now, you have a good overview now of the basic idea of creating a template and then how to instantiate and create an instance of whatever that template is. This could have been bicycles, and we would be dealing with things like the number of gears and the frame color and whatever else. It'd be a whole different object. Okay. Now we're going to take a look at one more thing, and then we'll be done with this introduction here. And then don't forget, there's a bonus video in this lecture that shows you a use case for an object literal. All right, let's finish off here with one final sort of foundational component of a basic class, and that is the toString method. So we have the basic ideas here. We've talked about a constructor, which is what builds the object, right? And then we have the setters and getters, which allow us to use private variables to access the information outside of the class without allowing direct access to the variables. So the user can't, or the coder can't directly access the variable. They have to go through the setters or the getters. The final piece here is, as I mentioned, the toString method. So let's clear out this stuff here. And we've got the one dog here, Pluto. And I want to just print this dog to the DOM or to the console or whatever. I actually have a div here in my HTML with an ID of dog. We'll use that to print our dog to the DOM rather than to the console, right? So this will show up on our web page. So all I need to do is document, oh my gosh, document.get element. What is going on right here? By ID, sorry about that. Dog, right? That grabs that div, and then I can just set its inner text to Pluto, right? Which is the name of our object. Except I can't do that, right? Let's see what happens when I do. Let's go back over here, and let's go ahead and close the console out, and refresh, and I get this. What the heck is that? Well, it's just letting you know that we tried to print an object. That's the short version. If you did this in Java, not JavaScript, but Java, you would actually get the memory address of the object. If you did it in PHP, you get an error, cannot convert object to string. So different languages handle this differently. JavaScript being loosely typed, it'll just say, hey, this is an object. So we need to not have that happen. So what we need to do is convert the object to a string. How do you do that? Well, there's a function that's aptly named toString. So it's toString, and then whatever this function returns will be the default behavior of when you try to just print an object like this. So if I were to try to print this, whatever is here, so I could just return hello, and now this entire object right here gets converted to the string hello. So if we refresh the page here, we will see it just prints hello. Now obviously that's not what we're looking for here. We want something a little bit more useful. So how about we do something like this? Let's use the backticks to save us a little bit of effort so we don't have to concatenate anything. And what I want to do is say Pluto is a 4-year-old speckled chihuahua, right? So we can start by writing that very phrase. It just makes it easier to change it. So I can just say Pluto is a 4-year-old speckled chihuahua. Now, obviously, this is not the ultimate thing we want to do, because what this means is every new dog we create, so let's go to Fido here, and his name is Fido, or Fio, we'll call him whatever. He's 5 years old, he's yellow, and he's a German Shepherd. I think that's how you spell that. Now, if I were to try to display Fido, it's literally going to say that Pluto is a 4-year-old speckled chihuahua, right? That's not what we're looking for here. What we want is the actual values of this specific object or this specific object, right? So let's do that. Rather than Pluto here, we're going to say this dot name. At the moment, this will give us an error, right? And we'll talk about why in just a second. And then Pluto is a 4-year-old, so this dot age. This will actually give us a value. So with that information, see if you can figure out why that's going to be an error and this will not be. We'll keep going now. This dot color followed by this dot breed. All of them are going to give an error except for age, and it won't really give an error. It's going to say undefined. So if we refresh it now, undefined is a 5-year-old, undefined, right? Because we are printing Fido. If I were to print Pluto, it would say undefined is a 4-year-old, undefined, right? Why is it undefined? Well, easy. When I did this dot name, that's me trying to call the name getter. There isn't a name getter. We never built it, right? I didn't have a setter or a getter. We do have, however, an age getter. So that's why the age works and none of the others do. Well, this is easy enough, right? To get them, we just need to make a get name right here, and we need to get a breed right here, and the color right here. And that will give us what we're looking for. Pluto is a 4-year-old speckled chihuahua, okay? And if I do Fido, we get Fido is a 5-year-old yellow German Shepherd. So now we've converted this object into something useful and more meaningful. Also note here, this is calling the getter, right? All of these that we used here are calling the getter. You can directly call the actual variable, the private variable, by putting the octothorpe there. And then let's just delete these, or I'll just comment them out. And so now these don't exist anymore, but this will still work. But and I just refresh it and nothing changed because it's still working. But doing this now, we're not actually using the getters anymore. We're using the actual raw variable. Now, we're inside of the class, and so it's not the end of the world if you do that. However, that's the whole point of the setter. It's designed to return, or excuse me, that's the whole point of the getter. It's designed to return the value of the variable. So good practice, best practice, the practice you should definitely do is this way, where we're calling the setter, right? And so, the getter. Sorry about that. Okay. I don't know what I said a minute ago, but I meant to say the getter. The whole job of the getter is to get the variable. I think I said it backwards a second ago. Sorry about that. Now if I refresh though, nothing changes, right? And the way the setters and getters are designed in JavaScript, it takes a little getting used to if you've worked with other object-oriented languages, but it looks like you're directly accessing the variable, right? If it weren't for that octothorpe, you would be directly accessing it, right? If those octothorpes weren't there, well, that is the variable, but they are there. But it looks like here, and even outside of the class, that you're just saying, well, we don't have an instance of it, but we were changing Pluto's age, I think. Pluto.age equals 7, right? And let's put Pluto down here. And now it says Pluto's a 7-year-old speckled chihuahua. This looks like you're directly accessing the age variable, but you're not. You're actually calling the setter, but that's just the way JavaScript handles setters and getters. They are designed so that if you name them properly, right, you name them after the variable name, the same as variable name, but with the parentheses, then it will actually function the way that it's functioning right now. Now, also notice, however, we don't have the setters created for everything but age, right? So we could also add those in, but for the purposes of the toString, we just needed the getters, And this right here, Pluto.age equals 7, that works just fine because we do have a setter here. And if we wanted to properly do that with the other variables so that we could go this, or Pluto.name and so forth, we would need to create setters as well. We're not going to bother for this little experiment. So that's it for this basic introduction to object-oriented programming. Thanks for coming to class. And as always, take a look at the screen, and if you can answer those questions, you're ready to take the quiz, and you learned what you needed to learn from this video. We'll see you next time, folks.